With the help of Hashem, we are learning Chagiga, Daf Gimel. We left off on Chagiga, Daf Gimel, 4 lines from the top of the Amid. In the Mishnah, when we were learning about the exemptions, the people that are not chayiv in Re'iyah. And as we explained, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, Re'iyah means both the mitzvah of appearing in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Azara, 3 times during the Yom Tovim, in the Shalosh Regalim. Re'iyah also means the obligation to bring the various karbanos that one has to bring when one appears in the Azara, both the karban oilas re'iyah, the karban shalmei chagiga, and whenever the meat of the chagiga runs out, shalmei simcha, additional shlamim. So throughout Yom Tov we should be able to fulfill the mitzvah of the samachta b'chagecha by having the meat of a karban. So we learned that a chedesh, a deaf mute, is exempt. And we explained that in the end of yesterday's shir that there are 2 levels of a chedesh. There is what we can call a full-fledged deaf mute, which is completely exempt. And then we explained Chasurim Mechsera in the Mishnah. We brought rayas from Abraisa that you have this partial chedesh. And the partial chedesh was both someone who can hear but cannot speak, or a person who cannot speak but can hear. Shemeya ve'ena medaber, and medaber ve'ena shemeya. Either or, such a person, the Gemara said in Abraisa, is going to be parted from the oila, but that person is going to be chayiv in the shalmei simcha. Then we quoted from Tosfos, also in the shalmei chagiga. So we ended off giving a certain concept of why do we differentiate. We're going to begin today's shir proving from scripture why indeed is the partial chedesh exempt from oilas re'iyah. We're going to have some laws regarding hakel. Amazing laws. The mitzvah that we have in the Parshas Vayelach is a mitzvah uniquely for men, women, children, and infants to appear in the Beis HaMikdash. That mitzvah happened once in 7 years. It happened in the beginning of Chol HaMoed Sukkos, in the year after Shemitah. That means when you entered the 8th year, in Eretz Yisrael there's only 1 day Sukkos. So after the first day of Yom Tov, at night everyone gathered and the king would read a big part of Chumash Devarim for the entirety of the people, and we will see that we have a Gzeira Shava between Oilas Re'iyah specifically and the mitzvah of Hakel. We're going to have a lot of Agadata today. We're going to have Agadata quotations from Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. We're going to go back to the story that we had in Brachas, Daf Chav Zayin Chav Ches, that there was a demotion of Rabbi Gamliel. There was a promotion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Many people are familiar with that story. Harei ani keven shivim shana that we say in Haggadah is connected to that event. Then they made a peace by sharing the leadership between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. If you remember the story in Brachas, one of the responsibilities of the head of the Sanhedrin was that this was the person who gave the lecture on Shabbos. We're not speaking about this sermon that an American rabbi gives. We're speaking about teaching hours of halacha every Shabbos afternoon. And they made a rotation system where Rabban Gamliel taught 3 weeks in a row. He was the original Rosh Hashiva. But then every 4th week, the teacher was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. We're going to have on Daf Gimel Amud Beis a difficult story to digest, but a story between Rabbi Yossi that shared what he learned in the Beis Medrash to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer wasn't present. Rabbi Yossi shared the teaching, but Rabbi Eliezer got so upset in the way it was shared that there was a kepeda, which means sometimes that tzaddik gets upset, and that has a not positive effect, in our case on Rabbi Yossi, but ultimately Rabbi Eliezer davened and the kepeda and its effects went away. And if we'll have time on Daf Gimel Amud Beis, we're going to go back to another exception in the Mishnah, which that is the shoita, the deranged person who is exempt from Re'iyah, and we're going to start to define, how do you define a shoita? What makes someone into a deranged person? And chevra, much, much more. So let us start on Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top of the Amid. Says the Gemara, now that we established that you have these 2-tier chedesh, you have a full-fledged chedesh, deaf mute, which is completely exempt from all of the mitzvahs, including from the oilas re'iyah, from the shlamim, versus the one who can speak but cannot hear, or can hear but cannot speak. that person is only exempt from Re'iyah. Maishna the Le'iyah Re'iyah, the Oila Re'iyah, this person is exempt thereof. Maishna Le'iyah Simcha, but this partial Chedesh is still obligated to bring the Shalmei Simcha, the Mechayvi. What's the source for that? Says the Gemara, because specifically when it comes to the Karban Oilas Re'iyam, we have the Gezerah Shavam, Le'inyan Re'iyah, Gamar Re'iyah, Re'iyah Mahakel. In other words, one of the 13 ways that we learn dinim in the Torah, in the oral Torah, is if there is a word that's used in one mitzvah, there is a same word or something very similar used in another mitzvah, and God told Moshe Rabbeinu that these words share a similar format to learn one from the other. So we have such a Gezerah Shava, Re'iyah, from the mitzvah of appearing in the Beis HaMikdash 3 times a year to the appearing that we have to do once in 7 years when everyone gathers together in the Azara known as the mitzvah of Hakel. Now the Chsiv, it says regarding Hakel, a pasuk in Vayelech, Hakel Esa'am, gather all the people. Who are all the people? The men, Ha'anashim, the Anashim and women, the Hataf and infants. And it says right prior to this, in the preceding verse, it says, B'voy kol Yisrael le'ra'os, that all of Israel is coming to appear. So you see the Torah uses the words le'ra'os by Hakel. Okay, now we have a Gezerah Shava. Now what? For Hasamin Allah, now by Hakel we know that if someone is even only a partial Chedesh, they are completely exempt from Hakel. But don't forget that that's Re'iyah. So Re'iyah will be used only for the Oilas Re'iyah. When it comes to the Shlamim, we don't use that Gezerah Shav. Now, how do we know that by Hakel, if a person is only partially deaf, they are exempt? Because it says over there in Vayelech and Hakel, Leman Yishmu'u u'Leman Yilmedu, that the purpose of gathering is in order to hear. Yilmedu means in order to learn. And we learned in Abraisa, Leman Yishmu, since the Torah says people gathered to hear, they have to be able to hear. Prat lemedaber ve'ena shemeya. If someone can speak, which is great, but they can't hear, they are exempt of Hakel. And here you see that's the partial Chedesh. Ulaman yilmedu. Now learning comes to exempt even someone who's able to hear, but if they are mute, yesterday we called that specifically an Elaim, a mute person, the Havamina is cannot properly learn. Since they can't learn, the Gemara is going to challenge it. Just because a person can't speak, it doesn't mean he can't learn. But based on the premise that he can't learn or can't learn properly, so he's exempt from Hakel. Now that we know that this partial Chedesh is exempt from Hakel, Gezerah Shava, they are exempt from Oilas Re'iyah.
What about nowadays they have sign language?
Okay, we'll speak to that in a moment. Are you telling me that if a person cannot speak, we're speaking about a person that is only mute? Maybe if you can't hear, so that's what Kevin is saying, that maybe when you can hear, if you figured out sign language, that's called hearing. There was no, here we're speaking about a person that can hear. They only cannot speak. So why can't you learn? Learning is being makabel. Teaching is something that you can't do. I'll prove to you that even people that are mute can properly learn. There were 2 mute students that lived B'Shavavusei in the neighborhood of Rebbe, of our great Rebbe, Rabbeinu HaKadosh. And they were either Bnei Barate de Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada, they were the grandchildren, the sons of the daughter of Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada, or these 2 Ilmei, these 2 mute students were the nephews of Rabbi Yochanan. V'amrillah Bnei Achsei, they were the sons of the sister of Rabbi Yochanan. Now, the whole Emas to have a oil Rebbe Lebei Medrashah. Every time Rebbe gave a class, have a island that you would come there, the Yosfi Kamaya, and they would sit, Oibenon, they would sit on the front. And now they're mute, but they would listen, Umanaydi Bereshayu, they were shaking their heads. And Umanachshin Sivivasayu. Even more interestingly, their lips would move along. Now, no sound would come out. But don't forget, Chevra, that then there was no written Torah. The oral Torah was oral. You needed to review it. So even though they were mute, they were reviewing. And you know what happened? At some point, Uboy Rebbe Rachmi Yolayu, Rabbeinu HaKadosh davened from God, or of God, that God should have mercy on them. And V'itasu, they were healed. And we discovered, V'ishtakach, that these people, they knew everything. They absorbed every single class. But the Havu Gemiri, Hilchas, and Sifra, and Sifri, and the whole Talmud. Now guys, in the times of Rebbe, what we call Talmud was not written. Doesn't matter. It means that every part of the oral Torah that was taught, they knew. So you see from a story that just because someone is challenged by them not being able to speak, it doesn't take away their ability to learn. So why are you telling me that Laman Yilmedu is excluding a mute? So Amar Marzutra, something that we had yesterday also, Aim Lamasoiris, Aim Lamikra, that even though that when we read the Torah, we have a tradition that we received from Moshe, how to pronounce the words in the Torah that are not written with vowels. But when it comes to learning halachas, Torah Shabbat Peh, many times the word should be read in many different ways. So when you read the Torah, Vayelach, Laman Yilmedu, but this teaching is learned from also pronouncing it Laman Yilamedu. People gather to learn for them to be able to teach. People learn in order for them to teach. And people that are mute cannot teach Kevan before there is hand language. Marzutra Kribe also read Laman Yilamedu. And these are people that are unable to teach. Now there is, as we learn in Hasidus, we learn in Ranat, the power of Dibur. We all know this from ourselves, that when we teach something, we understand it better. The irony, even though oisius are only something external, but the shoyrish of oisius comes even higher than the shoyrish of understanding. So there is a connection that real learning is only when you teach. Okay, and Ravashi says that has to be that way. It must be a good answer. Vadai lema'an yilamduhu. It must also be learned that people gather in Hakel in order for them to be able to teach. Because if the only way to read this verse is Laman Yilmadu, gather to hear and to learn, and if that would be the taich, what are we saying? That we are excluding the person that can't speak, which would mean that if you can't speak, you can't properly learn. Well, if such a person is excluded because they can't properly learn, then they were already excluded from the words Laman Yishmu. Laman Yishmu means to understand. If the premise is correct, that if you can't speak out, you can't properly understand, so you are already excluded from Hakel, from Laman Yishmu. So why did the Torah have to say Laman Yishmu, Laman Yilmedu? Ela vadai Laman Yilamedu. It's also to read it that even people that can understand, which is the mute, 100% understand, if they are unable to teach, they are exempted. Okay. Now let's go into certain details about the din of Hakel now that we have this Gzeira Shav. Amar Rav Tanchum. Cheresh ba'oznei achas. If a person is deaf only in one ear, the Mishnah was not addressing it. Look how we began. We began yesterday by interpreting cheresh, deaf mute. Taka, only a deaf mute is completely exempt. Then we said at the end of yesterday's class and in the beginning of Daf Gimel, okay, even if a person is a partial cheresh, they don't have to bring the oil to the ear. Now Rav Tanchum is adding, you have a Gzeira Shava, even if a person is only deaf in one ear, they are exempt from the ear. Because of the Gzeira Shava. This has nothing to do with understanding now. Why? Because it says over there by Hakel, it says Hakel, etc., neged kol ha'am be'ozneihem. Ozneihem in their ears, that's by Hakel, is plural. Be'ozneihem. So since by Hakel, whoever doesn't hear with two ears is exempt, the Torah says it's only for be'ozneihem. Now that you have a Gzeira Shava, you are even exempt from the Oilas Re'iyah. Says the Gemara, no, the words Ba'azneim means Ba'azneim the Kuli Yisrael. No, that means that when the king speaks the Devarim, it's not enough for people to gather. There has to be the possibility for every Jew to hear the king. Now I want to tell you, this is something borderline miraculous. Those of us who are Zoichet to be in 770, it was also quite miraculous. It was everyone is quiet, you have thousands of people, there's no microphone, and you can hear, if you made an effort, you can hear the Rebbe's voice. Imagine what happened in Hakel, what's going to happen in Hakel. Now I know that nowadays we can use a microphone on Chol HaMoed, but then there was no such a thing. When Moshe Rabbeinu spoke also, every Yid heard him. No, it's the word Bazneim just means to say that the king has to project his voice for everyone to hear. It's not to teach you that if someone can only hear in one ear, they are exempt. Answers the Gemara, that's not true. We know from the words Neged Kol Yisrael that the king has to project his voice in order for every Yid to hear. We know that from Neged Kol Yisrael. So the word Ba'azneihem is Taka teaching you that if someone was deaf even only in one ear, they don't have to gather for Hakel. And now we have Gzeira Shava, they are exempt from Oilas Re'iyah. Fragt die Gemara, we're not good yet. Im neged kol Yisrael hava mina afal gav de lo shami. If it would only say neged kol Yisrael, then you would think, again, who says you have to hear? You have to be present. You have to face the king. So that's why the Torah maybe writes Ba'az Neim that they have to hear, but it doesn't exclude someone that can hear with only one ear. So the Gemara says that's not true. When it says Neged Kol Yisrael, and it says Laman Yishmu'u, Herst, we already know, Neged Kol Yisrael, it says Laman Yishmu'u, we would have known that everyone has to hear Laman Yishmu'u. So why did Hashem have to write also the word in their ears? To tell you that if someone is deaf only in one ear, they are exempt from that obligation. It doesn't mean they didn't show up, but they were not obligated to show up, and therefore, Gzeira Shava, they are exempt from Oilas Re'iyah. Now that we quoted Rav Tanchaim, let's learn other than from Rav Tanchaim. Amar Rebbe Tanchaim, Chiger b'raglei yachas. If a person is lame in only one leg, only one leg. What did our Mishnah speak about? Our Mishnah spoke about Hachiger. The Mishnah didn't clarify. He's saying that if a person is lame even only in one leg, they are exempt from Re'iyah. Now here we're not using Gzeira Shava. Here we are focusing on the mitzvah of going up to the Beis HaMikdash. One of the words the Torah calls the 3 Yomim Tovim is Shalosh Regalim. Think about it. What are Regalim? What kind of Regalim? Regalim in plural. Now I know Shalosh means 3 legs. There's no 3 legs. It means legs. You have to have 2 functional legs. Doesn't the word regalim come to exclude prat lebale kabin? If a person, God forbid, is an amputee, now they used to use the prosthetic then was a piece of wood. So the Torah, don't we learn that if someone doesn't have physical legs, they are exempt. But if someone has 2 physical feet, even if it's lame, maybe they're not exempt. It's a big difference. So the Gemara says no. That the fact that if someone doesn't have a leg physically, God forbid, they are exempt from another expression the Torah uses regarding the mitzvah of Yom Tov, and that is Shalosh Pa'amim. It's amazing. That's Torah Shabbat Peh. When you learn Shalosh Pa'amim, you teach 3 times a year. That's the literal teach. The Gemara is going to tell you that the word Pa'amim is also alluding to feet, as we'll see from Sukkim, right? Shlomo HaMelech, Mayafu Pamayach Bana Olam. So we already know from Pa'amim in the plural that you have to have 2 physical legs. So Regalim is adding that if a person has legs but they're not functioning, even if it's only one that's not functioning, you're also exempt from Shalosh Regalim. How do we know that Pa'amim means feet? Pa'amim nafka Tanya, Pa'amim ein Pa'amim en raglaim. The word Pa'amim is an allusion to feet. The Chein Hu Omer, Pasuk in Yeshaya, that tir mesena regel, that the foot will trample. Raglei ani, the feet of the pauper. Pa'amei dalim, the soles of the needy. So here you see regel and pa'amei, pa'amayim. And it says, not only regarding the legs, but legs and shoes. Mayafu pa'amoyich bana olim. Oh, how lovely are your feet in shoes, you daughter of a noble one, Bas Nediv. So in other words, we see that if a person doesn't have a feet, they don't have shoes. Especially those prosthetics, they were the wood, there was a wooden leg. So again, so Shalish Pa'amim tells you Pa'amim, you have to have 2 legs. If a person, God forbid, has a part of the leg missing, they are exempt. Regalim is adding, even if you have the physical legs, but they're not working, they're lame. Even if it's only 1, it's not plural, you are exempt.
All right, I understand all the Gzeira Shava and all the comparisons. What is the reason that people with imperfections are not?
So Kavan is bringing up a good point. If I'll have time, we'll speak about this at the end of the shir. The Alter Rebbe and Chassidus sheds light that no one else can, as to why are we so particular to physical impurities in the Beis HaMikdash. And this is not only concerning what we're learning today, a kohen. If a kohen's nose is too long. Today we're living in a society where people are so sensitive that if a person has a handicap, we call them special. So why don't we call these people special? So they should have more mitzvahs, not less mitzvahs. We'll get to that at the end if you remind me if we have time. Dara Shirava. What's the meaning now that we quoted this verse? Oh, how lovely are your feet in shoes, you daughter of the nobleman. Now this is all Shlomo HaMelech and the Shir HaShirim. Really, it's the relationship between God and the Jewish people. As the mashal that a man is saying to a woman, oh, how beautiful. So it means, God is looking at us, we're God's wife. How beautiful are the legs of the Jewish people while they are walking up to the Beis HaMikdash. And as we mentioned yesterday, that there is an inyan, my friends, that especially from Yerushalayim to Har HaBayis, to go with your feet, to walk, begashmias. And when God sees that, that's when God says this verse. And He refers to the Jewish people as Bas Nadav. We are the child, we are the daughter of the Nediv. Now I know that today a Nadav means the big donor. Nadav means a nobleman. Now it's Lashon Yachid. Who is the nobleman? We are the children of Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu uniquely is called Nadiv, as it says in Tehillim, Nedivei Amim Ne'esafu. And who do we refer to specifically? Am Elokei Avraham. There's a challenge. We are the descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Why is Avraham uniquely called Nadiv? Elokei Avraham, Elokei, and not Elokei Yitzchak, Yaakov? So the Gemara says, yeah. Okay, what was unique about Avram? Avram Avinu was not born Jewish. That means Avram Avinu walked away from his old life to a new life. Yitzchak did not walk away from anything. Yitzchak maintained, and he added. And that's the concept of walking. In other words, Lech Lecha. You're going away from your old place to come to a godly place. Elokei Avram, that he was the first of all converts. And that's because we, the Jewish people, are called Bas. What's wrong with Bas? Bas is special. No, we are called Bas. As I get this. Feminine. Okay. Omar Rav Kahana. Another limit from Rav Tanchum. My Dechsiv in Parshas Vayeshev, that when Yosef HaTzadik was thrown into the pit, says the Torah V'haboyrek, the pit was empty. It had no water in it, and it sounds superfluous. Because once it says the pit is empty, empty means empty. Empty means, of course, there's no water. Ella answers the Gemara, no, it's to emphasize. The pit wasn't really empty. It was only empty from water. But you know what did exist in the pit? But there were snakes and scorpions. And Al-Pi Pnimius, Mayim is Torah, and the boy is the head. So we should understand that if we fill up our heads with content, with holy content, it automatically, a little bit of light takes away the nechashim and akravim. And if a person sees that their heads are filled with shtuyot, the problem is, don't fight it. You're going to lose. It's endless. Fill it up with Torah, and then there won't be any nechashim and akrav. Rav Tanchum. And I'm sure it's much more than that, but let's go back to Tana Rabbanan. A few stories today. Maaseh Rabbi Yochanan ben Broik. And let's go with our version and Rabbi Lazar ben Chisma. So we have two Tanoim. Shaholchu, the first white line, Lahagbel Pnei Rabbi Yeshua bePeki'in. They went to receive the face of Rabbi Yeshua. What's the pshat? Receiving the face of Rabbi Yeshua. So says Rashi, Chayev Adam Lechabed Rabbi. And according to some people, this is connected to Yom Tov. And actually, there are some who maintain that even after the Churban Beis HaMikdash, so we don't go up regolim to the Beis HaMikdash, we go to our Rebbe. There are others that say that only Bezman Beis HaMikdash Chayim, if someone for whatever reason was exempt of going to the Beis HaMikdash, so they needed at least to go through the Rebbe. Whatever the pshat was, these two Tanoim, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, Rabbi Lazar ben Chisma, they went to greet Rabbi Yeshua. Amar Lohem, and Rabbi Yeshua asked them, Mach chidush hoye bebeis hamedrash hayom? What was taught today in the Beis HaMedrash? So they told him, they were hesitating to share. So they told him, I said, we are your Talmidim. We came to learn from you. We didn't come to teach you. Amrulai Talmidecha anu. We are your students. Umeimecha anu shoisim. You see that? At least they have a hemshech over here, shuki. Water. We came to drink your waters. We're not here to share what was taught there. Amrulahem, no, afal pikein. No, don't come and share nothing. And if you're going to tell me that you already learned everything from me, but the fact that people gathered and learned, the third wide line, that's a very important statement. That's why when we review our learning, there's so many levels to it, including every time you review it, something new will come. And then he went further. This is Rabbi Yeshua. Shabbos shel mi hoisa. Whose Shabbos was it? Again, like we said, that Rabbi Gamliel was very gevuradik to Rabbi Yeshua. and the Chevra revolted against Rabbi Gamliel. That's Brachas Daf Chav Zayin Chav Ches. They kicked him out. There was a revolt in the Beis HaMedrash. They kicked him out from being the head of the Sanhedrin. They didn't know whom to put in his place. Rabbi Yeshua was the person whom they stood up for. He's not going in his place. Rabbi Akiva was the greatest tzaddik, but he didn't have schusavis. They were afraid. So they finally put their eyes on Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who was only then 18. Harei ani keven shivim shana. He was the Gilgal of Shmuel Hanavi with the 52 years that we just learned about on Moed Katan. And he got a white beard overnight. As I state over there in the Gemara, we quote this in the Haggadah. But after they made a peace, so they made a rotation system, which was unique. 3 weeks in the month, Rabbi Gamliel was the one that taught Halacha Shabbos. They learned the whole Shabbos, the way they Rabbi Fabreng. They Fabreng the whole Shabbos. And once a month, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So Rabbi Yeshua began to pull teeth. You got to share what you learned. Who was the teacher? So they said it was the Shabbos of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. And then you see, he needs to ask them, he needs to push them. Okay, what was the discourse? And now, and they began to share gold. They told him, we were learning about the portion of Hakel. You see that? He has to ask them, you see people that are like speaking to a Rebbe, you are afraid. You answer the question the shortest you could, and you're waiting for the Rebbe to open up. And what did he say? So he said like this, Hakel the mitzvah is to gather the men, all the people, the nation. What's the nation? Ha'anoshim, Noshim, and Taf. So they asked, Im Anoshim bo'im lilmoid, Noshim bo'ois lishmoya, Taf lama boin. There's so much on why do we use lilmoid on the men and lishmoya on the Noshim, but let's leave that. The point is like we mentioned yesterday, that even chinuch means that the child is being trained to do something that later he'll be obligated to do. There is a certain age of chinuch. Taf, we say, there's a machloikes. Taf means even just born, an infant. Why are you gathering the infant to come? What, he cannot hear, he cannot teach, he doesn't understand. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah answered, "Kedei litin schar lemivieim," to give reward to those who bring the child. There's so many levels of understanding this. Al pi Chasidus, that schar, because there's something that we learn from the infant. What do we learn from the infant? The infant is connected not because of his chachma or bina, which they don't have yet in a revealed way. What does the child have? What do you see in a child more than anything else? The purity or emunah. They inspire emunah to the adults. The simplicity, the tmimus dekait. And it's interesting that Tosfos writes in the end of the Amid that that's why today we bring infants to shul, or we bring minors to shul. Even though they're not old enough to daven, we bring them to shul because the words that he uses, it brings a merit to those who bring. Now, we're not talking about the merit to go to Gan Eden. It adds something. Being in the presence of a child adds something to the adult, which is that we see that child just came out of Gan Eden. And it really has to do with bittul, and with emunah. And we learn from the taf how to be bittul and how to have more emunah. And that connects us to the inner part of godliness, even more than the understanding and the listening.
How much more so for an adult, bring another adult, no?
What was that?
How much more so if you bring a child, why not bring another adult who can't walk? For example, a person who's an amputee. Why?
First of all, we're not saying that they were not brought there. They're not obligated. You don't confuse obligation. Okay, weiter. Omar Lohem. So this was so meaningful to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He tells them, "Margolius toiva hoyse biyetchem." You had a beautiful pearl. Ubikashtem la'abda mimeni. You were keeping it away from me. Like he was upset that they didn't right away share what they learned. Now that these students shared something, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was happy. Unlike the story we're going to learn soon on Amud Beis. So now they began to share more. Now they got comfortable. So v'oy darash. V'oy darash means that they are quoting more that was expounded by Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. These are words that we find in Parshas Kisavei. It says as ha'avaya he'emarto hayoim v'havaya he'emircha hayoim. If those of us who learn chitas, and we also learn chitas, Rashi writes that we don't find anywhere else in Scripture this word he'emarto he'emircha in this context. Ein lohem eid moichiach b'mikra, or something like that. So Rashi says it means that we chose God and God chose us. That's the way Rashi teaches. No, it's we he'emarta God and God he'emircha us. Rashi writes, chosen in the Chumash. Here the Gemara writes like this. Here this is what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah expounded. Atem asisuni chativa achas ba'olam. You, chativa means a unique praise. You praised me in a unique way. So I reciprocated, God. I praise you in a unique way. Vani esa eschem. I also will praise you in a unique way. What are these praises referring to? So the Gemara says, Atem asisuni chativa achas ba'olam, the last line of the Amid. That's, you know what the unique praise is? That we declare Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. In other words, we make a declaration which speaks about God's uniqueness. God is Echad. There's nothing else. So how does God reciprocate? What does God say? Daf Gimel Amud Beis. Umi ka'amcha ki Yisrael go yechad ba'aretz. That's a declaration which also speaks about the uniqueness, the specialness of the Jewish people. Now look inside the top Tosfos. So Tosfos says, it says in the Medrash that there are three witnesses, one testifies for the other. This is a beautiful Tosfos. The Yidden, Shabbos, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, the Jewish people, I'm reading inside Tosfos, Yisrael HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we testify on Shabbos that it's a day of rest. Yisrael and Shabbos testify al HaKadosh Baruch Hu that He's one. HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'Shabbos. Where do we have HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'Shabbos? That's why Shabbos Mincha. In other words, when we say in the Mincha, in the Ata Echad, Mi Ka'amcha ki Yisrael geyachad ba'aretz, that's based on this. Va'al zeh samchin en loimer Ata Echad b'Mincha b'Shabbos. Even though Tosfos brings out the question that in that stanza in the Shemona Esrei you don't speak about Shabbos. In other words, Yismach Moshe Shabbos morning, or the Kedusha of Shabbos Friday night speaks about Shabbos in the Shemona Esrei. Ata Echad doesn't speak about Shabbos. No, it's Shabbos speaking about the Jewish people. Beautiful. We speak about Shabbos, and God in Shabbos speaks about the Jewish people. And weiter, va'afu pasach v'darash. And furthermore, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah expounded the following verse in Koheles. Now these.
Can you explain how this is learned out from this pasuk? How it's Hashem
and Marta means that you proclaimed a unique praise to me, and I reciprocated by proclaiming. God says a unique praise about you. It says in Koheles.
The word chativa is praise.
The word chativa means a unique praise.
I thought chativa was like
a slice, a shtugush,
right.
A unique piece, a separated. What's a praise? You are special. We are a special chosen people. Right. It says divrei chachamim kidor voinois, that the words of the sages are like goads. Now goads, when you are plowing a field with oxen, how do you make sure the oxen go in a straight line? They do exactly what our teachers did to us in Cheder. If you get off the line, you get a knock. So the words of the sages are like the goads. Shlomo HaMelech didn't have my teacher. If he would have had my teacher, he would have said, Divrei Chachamim, Divroinois Mamish. But like the goats. And then he went on to say, Uchamasmerois Letuyim. And like nails that are well planted are the words of the Bali Asufos, are the words of the masters of assembly. In other words, the Chachamim gathered the people. And all of it was given from one shepherd. It's a very enigmatic verse. So it explains Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. First of all, the first comparison the pasuk gives is that the words of Torah, which is also the words of the sages, are like goats. Why? To tell you, just like a goat keeps the ox or the cow in a direct line, it makes the furrow straight. And why are you making a furrow? Because what do you do in the furrow? You plant grain, you plant vegetables, you plant life. In other words, you're getting gevura, the ox is getting a little bit nudged. But all of that is in order to bring life in the world. The words of Torah, it's gvuradik, without jest. In other words, you're learning Torah, God says, don't do this, don't look there. We are in the straight and the narrow. We're from a Eden. But the straight and the narrow is not to keep people oppressed. It's because in this straight and narrow, life is brought into the world. It keeps us away from the paths of death, and it keeps us on the path of life. Now, King Solomon wasn't stopping there. You know why? Because if all he would have done was to compare the words of the sages to this goad, then one would think that a goad is not affixed to anything. You see, it's a movable, which means it's not nitzchi, it's not forever. You would think just like it's movable. Movable means, let's say, not lasting. So Kavan is finding a goat. Av divrei Torah, you have to find the whip of my teacher, much better than the goat. Av divrei Torah, mitaltalin. The words of Torah, one might think, they're not lasting. They change with the times. That's why King Solomon added the comparison. No masmerois. What's a nail? What's the purpose of a nail? A nail is something that becomes affixed in the place. A nail represents something that's koiveya. But if we would only compare it to a masmer, what happens when you knock a nail into the ground? So before you had a wooden tile. What happens when you put the nail in? Some of the wood goes away. So the nail eats up some of that which was there before. So if we only would have left it here, ima masmer, we would think zechasr v'lo. The nail diminishes, but it doesn't increase. So there's a downside. Yeah, it's something that fixes. So you would think that the words of Torah, right, they tell you can't do this or you can't do that. My life is lacking. I wish I could have done more. Okay, it keeps me affixed and it keeps me away. So no. So that's why he added they are planted. We compare it to a plant. Just like when you plant something, the plant is part of a rava. The words of Torah, they add to our lives. Avdiv Torah, part of a rava. Then King Solomon compares the sages to the masters of assembly. Ba'alei asufos. What does that refer to? This refers to the sages. Sheyoshvem asufos, that they sit in groups. And here the Torah, the Gemara is emphasizing the importance of not learning by yourself. And the bigger the group, the better. I know there's a limit. What happens when you learn in a group? One person says A, the other person says B. And you begin to a debate. It's amazing. Walk into Lahavdil Goyish library. Everyone is learning, shashtil. Everyone is sitting by themselves. If you cough, you'll be kicked out. Go into a Beis Medrash. If it's quiet, you can't learn. It's a whole. You gather people, and the purpose is to make a debate. Now, some people say, I can't take it. Nothing is clear. This guy says kosher, that guy says treif. Is this product kosher? Put it on a WhatsApp. You'll have 50 answers. So that's the point. So they gather asufas, and they are oisik b'toidim. And when you have large groups, you won't have the same conclusion. Some people say metame, other people say metarin. These people say aser, those people say mutar. These people say pasol, those people say machshirin. And that's a positive. So Shema Yemru Adam, a person is going to say, oh my gosh, Heich ani lamei toira ma'atech kenish learn it. Everything is debated. No one agrees on anything. Never heard that? Talmud Loima, that's why King Solomon says, you learn in a group. Bali Asufos. Remember that kulam nitnu meroy echad. All of it was given from one shepherd. One God gave it, God Almighty. Padnos means a leader. That's in reference to Moshe Rabbeinu or to the Rebbe. There's one God, there's one Rebbe. Which means we have twice in Shas this concept, but here it's more elaborate. There's something called Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. That's Eruv in Yud Gimel, which means that even though we only paskin like one side, when you take part of a debate in Torah where people are doing it l'shem shamayim, don't think half of the people have it wrong. Everyone has it right. We only paskin like one side. This is Torah. Torah is showing things, everything from 50 different angles. Shivim Panim La Torah. And as it says, this is a beautiful interpretation. Right before we read the Ten Commandments, Daseres Hadibris and Parshas Yisro, it says, Vaydaber Elikim es kol hadvarim ha'ela. What word is extra? Every mitzvah, what does it say? It says, Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe Leimer. Say, Vaydaber Elikim es hadvarim. What's wrong with that? We call it the 10 Dvarim, 10 Dibros. Vaydaber Elikim es hadvarim. What's kol? That's the call. That was Garab Lazav and Azari. Call means that when you learn Torah, this one says Tahar, this one says Tameh. God said both sides. God already told Moshe, there's one angle, there's another angle. All of it is from God. And therefore, Af ata asay oznecha, make your ears ka'afar keses. Afar keses, Kevin is going to find a picture. Oh, I love that. It's when you funnel a lot of grain into a small utensil. It's when you learn, open up your ears wide. Don't say, oh my God, I'm getting confused. Let me just follow one approach. And learn Rashi and learn Tosfos and learn the Rashba and learn Lidrit. Gather everyone. Bring it into your mind. And now you have a big work to do, because now that you heard 80 opinions, you have to paskin like one. And for that, you have to really work hard. Uknei l'cha leiv maven, and acquire for yourself a discerning heart. Lishmaya, to listen to the words, which means to the reasons of those that were metame, to the reasons and the words of those that were metahir. Es divrei oisren, ves divrei matirin, ves divrei poisen, ves divrei machshirin. And with Yigia, decide who the halach is like. So what happened? So we had our great masters that did all the hard work for us, right? They wrote a Shulchan Aruch. So what did God help? Even though you have a Shulchan Aruch, afterwards, Nachamal, 50 opinions in the Shulchan Aruch. There's no end. That's the way it was meant to be. So when Rabbi Yeshua and Pekian heard this, Baloshan Hazeh Amar Lehem, this is what he told these two Chachamim. Ein doir yasam. You can never say that this is an orphan generation, since Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is living amongst it. And he wasn't only referring to the physical life of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He meant to say that in any doir that people live with these words that we just learned, that's not called a doir yasam. A doir yasam is when you don't listen to the other side. That's an orphan generation. And that lahavdil goes even in the world, not only it begins with the Torah. That everything has multi-sides. And the only way God wants for us to listen to every angle. And every person has to acquire for themselves a leiv maven to go and figure out what is the right way in this circumstance.
So does that mean one can paskin for themselves?
That doesn't mean one can paskin.
I mean, if you're learning all the different opinions, you can.
One answer to Kevin, that means that even nowadays there are many areas in practice where in halacha there is area to go this or to go that, and every case is a case. And every case is a case. Okay, now what's amazing is that was a good Shabbos Drush. And why is it that when these two Tanoim, they were so hesitant? So I get it the first time. They said, we're your students, we came to drink from your waters. But then, who was the teacher? He was. And what did he say? And he was like pulling their teeth. So the Gemara wants to understand, why didn't they come back and tell him what they said? Now, the next story, fasten your seatbelt. People get disturbed by these stories. They have to be understood. Nothing should be taken literally. But you should know that around great tzaddikim, at times, people close to them get into trouble because tzaddikim are functioning on a very high level of gevura, and if you go off a little bit, you can get into trouble. And this goes by the greater the tzaddik, like, so to say, by God Almighty. When it says in Tehillim that usvivav nisa'ara ma'oid, literally it means that around God there's a whirlwind. So Chazal say that those who are closer to God, God is medagdek with the tzaddikim kechut ha'sa'ara. That if you're off, and everything in life is that way. When a person is an initiate, when you're doing something, if you're on the lowest rung of the ladder, you're practicing a sport. If you're an amateur, there's going to be a lot of tolerance to your mistakes. Once you become a black belt, now you can make one little thing, you're out. Okay, so this is what happened over here. So why didn't they share right away? That was taught Mishum Maisa Shoy, because of the story. This was like the famous story. What happened? Tanya, Maisa ben Rabbi Yosi ben Dur Muskis. Shahalach lahagbil penei Rabbi Eliezer, says the Digdukei Soifrim in Lud. And the same similar story. So when this Rabbi Yosi went to visit Rabbi Eliezer, now we know if it's Rabbi Eliezer was a Shamuti, he was from the school of Beishama, he was very gevuradik. So Amar Loi, Rabbi Eliezer tells Rabbi Yosi, Ma chidush hoy bebeis hamedrash hayom. Nu, share, what did they learn today? Now let me tell you something, I'm going to say bekitzer by heart. What he shared was 100% okay. Whatever was taught was correct, but it wasn't quoted from the right source. What are we talking about? So let me go bekitzer. When we conquered Eretz Yisrael under the leadership of Yeshua, at that time, prior to Yeshua was Moshe Rabbeinu, who conquered the lands east of the Jordan, including the territory of Ammon and Moav. They were consecrated. They had the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, and the many halachas in the Torah that are connected to agriculture, uniquely to the Holy Land, was also biblically applicable to the lands right adjacent to Israel. Beginning with that, we have a cycle of 7 years. And there are many details about how we tithe the produce from those 7 years. And it's not always the same. You always have to separate Truma. Afterwards, you have to separate Meiser, Rishon. However, after that, On the first and the second year of the 7-year cycle, we separate Meiser Sheni. Whatever you separate belongs to you, but you have to eat it in Yerushalayim. On the third year, after Truma and Meiser Rishon, you separate Meiser that's given to an Ani. On the fourth and the fifth year, Truma Meiser Rishon, Meiser Sheni. On the sixth year, Truma Meiser Rishon, Meiser Ani. What about the seventh year? Seventh year, since God declares that we may not take ownership over the produce, I can pick a little bit from Ishmita. There is no tithings. Everything belongs to everyone. Hold on. What happens? Says when came Nebuchadnezzar, and through conquest he took us out of Israel. So this is a topic that's discussed a lot throughout Shas. Our Gemara follows the opinion that Kedusha Rishoina Kitcha L'Shaita V'loi Kitcha L'Asad Lavi, which means that the first sanctification that we imbued the Holy Land with, since it was done through conquest, so another conquest outdid the first conquest and it lost its Kedusha. When Ezra moved back to the Holy Land during the Second Temple era, it was not through conquest. It was those Persians gave us permission. We took ownership by settling the land. And even after Rome exiled us, we never lost that acquisition. Just to be aware of that. And this is all very much debated.
When did we deliver it? We lost it.
Lav Dafka. Okay, so there's a whole machloikas whether Kedusha Rishoina, Kitcha L'Shaita, Kitcha L'Asalavi or not. One thing is clear, that when we entered Israel, our Gemaras, on the first time, when Nebuchadnezzar exiled us, the land lost its Kedusha. And we needed to re-imbue it with Kedusha when we settled it the second time. But here's the catch. Since it lost the first Kedusha, we needed to re-sanctify it. When we settled Israel under Ezra, we didn't settle the entire land of Israel. We did not resettle the countries east of the Jordan. They are not holy. Now, if they're not holy, biblically, you don't have to give any trumas or maises.
Why would even the land of Israel have to?
Because we re-sanctified it. The second conquest re-sanctified. Just listen. Now, even though biblically, this is the way we're going to learn the Gemara, the lands of Ammon and Moav during Bayis Sheni didn't need to be tithed. The Chachamim said you have to tithe it. But here's a catch. They never said to keep Shemitah. So now I have a kasha. If I have to tithe it rabbinically and I don't keep Shemitah, so on the 7th year, Truma, Midarabanan, Meiser Rishon, what's the next tithe? So logically you would have thought, you see, it's 2 years Meiser Sheni, 1 year Meiser Ani. 2 years Meiser Sheni, 1 year Meiser Ani. Meiser Ani is on the 6th year. So you would think that on the 7th year, Meiser Sheni, rabbinically. So they said in the Beis Medrash, really it wasn't them, it was already established before, that the Chachamim want you to give Meiser Ani again. Let's read it inside. So Nimnu v'Gomru, they took a vote. There was a question, and they took a vote that Amaynu Moav, the produce that grows in the lands east of the Jordan, like we explained, during the times of the Second Temple, only have to be tithed rabbinically. Ma'asrin Meiser Ani Bashvi is, and not Meiser Sheni. Now, this is correct, but you know what's not correct? It wasn't their debate in which they voted correctly. That was already established in the beginning. The Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, when we conquered the land the second time and didn't Ammon and Moav, they already established it. So Rabbi Eliezer was very upset that we were attributing this halacha to the vote that happened today in the Beis Medrash when this was already an established rule. So Amaloi, so he tells this Rabbi Yosei, Pshoit yodecha, extend your hand. Extending your hand sometimes indicates if I'm coming and bringing nothing to the table, like a good Jewish guest, so at least come, let everyone see you're bringing nothing. Like you came here and you brought me nothing. And go be blind yourself. Because the Chachamim are called the eyes of the community. You're bringing nothing, I don't need your eyes. And you know what happened? Pashat Yada Viki Balenav, he became blind. And 1 second, Rabbi Lazar did it. He healed him. But first, he cried. Why did he cry? So that Arizal says, this is one of the Gemaras, that before you pray, cry. It's a good Many people know how to do this. Many from people, they're very good at it. It says in the Siddur here, you have to cry, and they cry, and then they pray. And it's mamtik de gevuris. But he began, first he said, that the secret of God is given over to those who fear him. His covenant becomes known to them. In other words, that even though the people in this Beis Medrash, they voted on something that was already the halacha, which means that they were not that learned. They should have known it was already established, but at least they got it right. You see that the secret of God, they had at least Yirah Shamayim, so they got it right. And Omar Loi, Rabbi Eliezer tells Rabbi Yossi, go and tell them, Al tachush lo leminyanchem. Don't feel bad. No, don't be afraid that you made the wrong halachic ruling. You're going to come back blind because I got it wrong. No, you got it right. But you shouldn't have quoted the current generation. It was already pre-established. Kach mikublani Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai that heard it from his teacher and his teacher from his teacher. Listen to these words. Hilchasa l'Moshe Sinai. What does the word Hilchasa l'Moshe Sinai mean? Normally it means a halacha that got taught to Moshe. It cannot mean this over here. Because this whole thing is a rabbinic rule. This Hilchas Moshe Sinai means something that's as not debated, just like a halacha Moshe Sinai. That's you see on the side from the Rosh. Davar barur ke halacha Moshe Sinai. Then amanu mayav me asrin ma'aser ani bashvis. And why is that? Why did the Chachamim say to give Ma'aser Ani? Isn't it logical? Ma'aser Ani is just a third. Ma'aser Sheni, Ani. Sheni, Ani. So the next year should be Sheni, because since Harbi Karacham Kafshu Elam Mitzrayim, many of the cities that were conquered by those who entered, we call the people that left Egypt, even though really they died in the desert. And they were not reconquered, and therefore those places were not holy. And why is that? Because Kedusha Rishayna, the first sanctification done through Yehoshua, was only Kitchel Shaita. It worked only as long as we were there. You have to add a lot in between the lines. And then when they came back, they re-sanctified it. But they did not re-sanctify Ammon and Moav. That's very important. So you have to begin with the premise. See, this is the point. If you have a place that has to be tithed midda oiraisa, then you have to keep Shemitah. It goes together. If you have to keep Shemitah, you separate nothing on the Shemitah year. But since, verstehst, there was no din Shemitah, Trumas U'Maasros was only midrabanan, so they said let it also work on Shemitah. We wanted for there to be more food for the poor people. So you got it right. But this came from Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. And he was upset that Rabbi Yossi said the truth. What did he say? That they took a vote in the Beis Medrash.
What is it that he didn't speak up? And that's why he said he should be blocked.
Maybe you should have spoke up. What are you guys voting? I expected you to know that this is already an old halach. But the story has a happy ending.
Rabbi, don't kill the messenger. Here he just has to...
No, so that's why Kevin is making a good point. It wasn't the messenger that Rabbi Eliezer was expecting of Rabbi Yossi. This is not the normal Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi ben Durmaskis, that he should have challenged this whole vote. Why are you guys taking a vote on something that was already voted from the beginning? It's not even a debate. But when Rabbi Eliezer calmed down, Amar, he said, may God return the vision of Rabbi Yossi and v'chazru. All right, now let's begin. Let us begin the next segment. So we learned in the Mishnah from the many people that are exempt of Re'iyah is the Shaita. Who's the Shaita? How do you define the Shaita? So here the Braisa says, number one, Hayotzi Yechida Balayla. If someone goes alone at night to an uninhabited place, adds the Rishonim. You're walking in dangerous places. Or, we'll see if it's or. V'halon bebeis hakvaris, someone who sleeps in a cemetery. We learned that in Brachas. And v'ha mikoreya es ksusoi, someone who rips their garments or breaks their furniture for no reason. One second. So Itmar we learned regarding this Brais. We have to further elaborate it. Rav Huna says, now let me say this by heart. We're learning, there's many ways of learning. We only have time to share one way. Generally in halacha, for you to establish something, that thing has to be repeated 3 times. That's called a chazak. And as we'll see in a moment, if someone does something that's insane, that makes absolutely no sense, 3 times in a row, as the way we'll learn the Gemara, that's a shaita. what the chiddush here is that even though this person never repeated these behaviors more than once, but the same person did 3 insane behaviors, even though one is not related to the other, we say, that's a chazak. That's what Rav Huna is saying. That if they, again, I know the word afilu is afilu, but the Rishonim say Rabbi Yochanan is saying that if he does one, and he repeats this one various times, 3 times or more, that's a shaita. The way we'll learn the Gemara is that Rav Huna is saying it doesn't, there has to be 3, but it can be from 3 separate things. Now we have to add something, context. You know, when you see someone sleeping in the cemetery or any other behavior, if you know more context, what happened before, what happened later, you have to see the guy's home, you have to see what type of fight he had in his house. We had a Gemara in Brachas that someone used to sleep in the cemetery because they would hear what the spirits are talking about, they would find out the futures of stocks. You have to find out more info. So, hey chidami, if we saw that this person did something that has no rational explanation, afila b'chadanami, then why do we have to see a repetition happening 3 times? If someone does something completely insane, then 1 time should be enough. Meshuga is meshuga. And if he doesn't, and if you can explain what they're doing, then even repeating it many times, it should have no indication that he has the definition or she has a definition of a shaita. So the Gemara says 3 lines from the bottom: Lo oilam de ka'aved lahu derech shtos. Someone did something that you cannot explain, but just because someone does something that to you looks insane, if they don't repeat it 3 times, you can't define them into a shaita because you never know. You never know. For example, if a person sleeps in the cemetery once, you can argue, the person is sleeping there because if you sleep in a cemetery, there's a possibility that some spirits will connect to you and you will be imbued either with the power to do black magic, or you're going to know some information about the future or about the past. It could be explained. Once is not enough. When you see someone doing something crazy once, you're not a shaita yet.
All these are witnessed by 1 person or 3 people or
God witnesses. A person who walks in a place where no one lives at night. So you can argue, why are you walking there? That he was seized, Rashi gives 2 explanations, either with a certain type of anxiety, or he had fever and he wanted to go where there's fresh air. Happened to be that he walked into an uninhabited place. You don't know when a guy is walking out. If a person is ripping his garments once, you can argue, Bal machshavos. Bal machshavos is certain people get so lost in their thoughts that they become completely unaware of what they're doing. You can argue that. But kivin davdina lukulu, once a person does 3, so then havalahu kimi daf dalid. Oh, this is so great. This is such a great comparison. I will read the words. It's like an ox that gored an ox, and a donkey and a camel. Now 1 second, let me explain what that means. Bikitzit. If you own an animal, the animal damages another animal. The rule is that for the first 3 times, since the animal that you owned is not a known mazik, it was a domesticated animal, so even though you are partially responsible, it's only a partial responsibility. With a lot of details, you pay half of the damage if your animal has the value of half of the damage. Once the animal repeated its behavior 3 times, now it's an established damaging animal. You didn't watch it, it damaged, pay the full damage. You have to have a repetition of 3. But here's the same question. So if my ox gored 3 different oxes, for sure, it's a damaging ox for oxen. What happens if my ox gored an ox, a donkey, and a camel? So just like over there, we put them all together. We don't say it has to repeat the same exact thing 3 times. It gored 3 times, and it becomes a muat lakoil. No matter what other animal it's going to gore later, it's already a muat for which the owner has to pay the full damage. That's the point of Rav Huna. So if you have a person that does 3 different activities, even though we're beginning with the premise that one act of insanity doesn't make you insane. Everyone is entitled actually to 2 actions of insanity. Save them. It's the 3 times. The point is, you don't have to repeat the same act of insanity. We put it all together. Now, I want to share like this, that the definition of a shaita, I'll come back to your question before about the blemish. The definition of a shaita is not the same in all areas of halacha. There is an area of halacha that if a woman or a man are insane, they cannot get divorced from each other, which is a terrible thing. Because what happens if you're married to a sane person, and then you think they became insane? even if they want to give you a get, if the Torah says that person is a shoita, he or she, he's not capable of giving, she's not capable of receiving. So there was a story with the Tzemach Tzedek that there was a man that went insane. And he was willing to tell a Beis Din to write a get, but halachically, he's insane. So the Tzemach Tzedek called him in, and he gave him a ruble, he gave him the $10 bills, and he tells him, please buy in the market apples for me. And this Meshugana went out of the window. He went out of the window. And he came back with apples and the right change. The moment that happened, the Tzemach Tzedek called the Beis Din. He told the man to tell the Beis Din to give a get, and they gave a get to her. And he found a Yerushalmi that says that for divorces, the definition of an insane person is a person who doesn't know how to count change. It means when you go to the market and you don't care about the change, you're Meshuggah. But that's only the definition of insanity for Gittin. When it comes to insanity for having to go up to Oilas Re'iyah, that's the definition of insanity. You have to repeat a certain behavior 3 times. And if yes,
really quick.
L'chaim. Oh, I love it.
So when it comes to alcoholism and drug addiction, for Yiddishkeit, does the first time they take whatever it is before they became single, or because repeatedly it's an insane problem, repeat things that
So let me answer Baruch this. If a person is under the influence,
that it hurts them.
if a person is under the influence while they are under the influence, even for the first time, there is a certain cutoff point in which we say they are shikr like loit, in which they are then exempt from the entire Torah, even once. But we're not going to say that since a person got shikr like loit once, that they will continuously repeat it. But once the behavior was done 3 times in a row, then you got yourself a problem. You should know that there is a concept of this 3-time repetition. If a person does that 3 times, Baruch, then they are insane. The only thing is that the whole world is insane. So maybe the only way we can survive in an insane world is by being insane ourselves. But don't get drunk. Now, coming back to what Kevin said.
Thank you for that clarification, Rabbi.
Thank you. Now, I just want to speak about infirmities. These are the words. That God made the world in a way that there was something called Adam and something called Ma'od. This is a Hasidic concept. Adam is a world in which everything is perfect, which is the world of Atzilus, which has to be married in the Beis HaMikdash. Ma'od are compensators. Ma'od is the world of Golus. Ma'od is where I'm lacking vision, so my hearing got 10 times better. Golus. Outside the Beis HaMikdash, we celebrate people that have handicaps because a handicap means they are special. If I'm lame in my legs, then some other part of my body will become a lot stronger. And that's to an advantage. The temple specifically is a place where everything has to be perfectly balanced. So the temple doesn't tolerate infirmities. A lot more, but that's the Nakud of the Alter Rebbe. Chevra, to be continued.